It was because these dark green undead looked so terrifying that Shaun and his men felt afraid. These undead must simply not be trifled with. Noting their expressions, Green said, "Do not worry. These undead were summoned by my master and will not just randomly attack you. Well, it seems like you have successfully completed your task. As thanks, here are some coins, Shaun. Share it with your brothers. You can all go back now." Green gave Shaun 5 gold coins. This was no small amount of money. Shaun had a total of 10 men with him, which means that they each would receive 5 silver coins. For these porters, this was considered a small fortune. But although he took the gold coins, Shaun wasn't happy. "Dear warrior, how about letting us help you bring the carriages up the mountain?" Green shook his head. "My master would not like you bothering him at his house. You must go back." With a wave, the undead rushed forward to take over 4 of the carriages. Green then looked at Shaun with cold eyes. "Shaun, let me remind you that this mountain is full of undead. With just a few words, I could order them to attack you. Honestly, it's best that you go home." With that, Green got onto a carriage and went into the black fog. It only took 2 steps before you couldn't see his shadow. Once Green left, Shaun couldn't help but break out into a cold sweat. He knew that Green must have found out that he wanted to take a look around. Shaun was a 4th level warrior. Although he didn't know what level Green was at, he knew that it was a lot higher than his. If Green wanted to kill him, it would be almost like strangling an ant. Shaun immediately turned to the porters and said, "Let's go back." They all turned around and walked back to Casa City. Their faces were pale. Green had long found out what Shaun was up to because Shaun's performance was a little too enthusiastic. Knowing how sensitive their identity was, Green couldn't let people come see them, otherwise they would end up in danger. As of now, there were a total of 5 carriages moving up the hill towards the manor. Each carriage was filled with 60 rabbits. These rabbits pretty much looked the same as the ones found on Earth. The only difference was their blue eyes. Each carriage was equipped with 30 wooden cages, and there was a pair of rabbits in each cage. Fortunately, these carriages were large, otherwise it wouldn't have been able to fit everything. Zhao was standing in the manor's yard when he saw the carriages come in. Each one was pulled by a scaled wildebeest. They were 2 meters tall, and they grew scales the size of fingernails, plus hairs in the crevices of these scales. Looking at these creatures made people feel uncomfortable. Their heads were similar to horses, but they had horns that were a bit like the wildebeests back on Earth. However, their bodies didn't look as smooth and strong. Instead, their bodies were more like cows, rather than horses. Despite that, their legs showed that they must have good endurance. As Green saw Zhao looking at them, he smiled. "Master, how do you like these scaled wildebeests?" Zhao nodded with a hand on his chin. "They're good. They will be useful for pulling things in the future. Grandpa Green, help me remove these things." Zhao, Green, and the undead opened the cages of the blue-eyed rabbits. All the while, Zhao brought them into the space. Once the blue-eyed rabbits were in the space, the voice immediately came and said discovery of new animal. Identifying. Mammal, Lagomorpholepridae, long-eared rabbit variant. Level 3. Based on animal data, they could be raised in the ranch. These rabbits can now be purchased from the shop. Young rabbits' maturation time is 10 hours. They can reproduce in 8-hour intervals. They can only reproduce 5 times. Each time will create 10 new rabbits. They feed every 4 hours. Due to gene variation, the rabbits can attack with water arrows. Attack range is 10 meters. Attack power is low. Zhao was very satisfied with what the space told him about the blue-eyed rabbits. Although they could only reproduce 5 times, each rabbit would be able to yield him a total of 50 more rabbits, and their maturation time was very short. It wouldn't be long before the ranch was up and running. After that, Green detached the scaled wildebeests from the carriages, then Zhao brought them into the space. Once the wildebeests were inside the space, the voice immediately came again and said discovery of new animal. Identifying. Mammal, bullfighting wildebeest variant. Level 3. Based on animal data, they could be raised in the ranch. These wildebeests can now be purchased from the shop. Young wildebeest maturation time is 12 hours. They can reproduce in 8-hour intervals. They can only reproduce 5 times, each time will create 5 new wildebeests. They feed every 2 hours. Due to gene variation, the wildebeests can create a stone body with a duration time of 2 hours. Defensive power is low. Hearing this, Zhao couldn't help but laugh. The scaled wildebeest was really something good. After Zhao had sent the rabbits and wildebeests into the space, Green wanted to see what expression Zhao would make. Seeing Zhao with a happy expression, Green couldn't help but feel relieved. Master, can we go into the space and look at the wildebeests and rabbits? Zhao turned around and faced Green, and saw how much he looked forward to it. He chuckled. Well, let's go see. Of course, they had to bring Meg along as well because Zhao, Green, and Meg were the only ones in the manor. Blockhead, Rockhead, Marin, and the slaves were at the castle, where there were many things that they needed to do. Zhao brought Green and Meg directly into the spatial ranch. When they came inside, they couldn't help but freeze for a moment. The pasture of the ranch was a really large and open place. 300 blue-eyed rabbits were roaming around, and although they were slightly bigger than the ones on Earth, they were still small enough that the grass would block them from sight. Zhao didn't forget that these blue-eyed rabbits and scaled wildebeests needed to be fed. He brought in some radish leaves, which the space automatically turned into the grass that these rabbits and wildebeests eat. When Green saw all these rabbits everywhere and the wildebeests running around, he couldn't help but give Zhao a wry smile. Master, is this all right? It will be difficult to pay attention to all of them. Zhao slightly chuckled. Just look at this. With a thought, he brought up a flute, which was one of the tools of the spatial ranch. A tune came out of the flute, and suddenly all the animals ran forward and lined up in front of Zhao. Green and Meg stared at this, never expecting that the space would have such a function. After a while, Zhao smiled and waved, and those rabbits and wildebeests ran away. Seeing this, Green couldn't help but muttered. The space could actually make them line up. Could it also move them into groups and ranks, like soldiers? Grandpa, what are you saying? Meg laughed when she heard what Green was muttering. Green recovered a bit, then chuckled. I'm just talking nonsense. There's no way that animals could move around like troops. When he said this, he suddenly froze for a moment as if he thought of something. His eyes brightened as he turned to Zhao. Master, can this ability to line up the animals be done outside? Zhao was taken aback, but he murmured, I don't know. Let me see. Can I use the formation function outside the space? The voice immediately came. The formation function can be used outside the space. This time Green didn't need Zhao to help him understand what the space said. He burst out laughing. Great! This is really great. Zhao and Meg still didn't understand. Grandpa, what are you talking about? Meg asked. Seeing the two's puzzled look, Green couldn't help but let out a slight chuckle. In a cavalry, a group of knights would queue up into a formation. When they attacked the enemy, they would start off by charging forward. But where do you think a cavalry's power comes from? It comes from attacking together in a maintained formation. Zhao and Meg didn't understand military matters, but after listening to Green, their eyes lit up. Everyone knew about the large power of the cavalry, but they still faced a difficult problem. That problem was the beasts that they were riding. You could teach discipline to a knight, but you couldn't teach discipline to the beast he was riding. Sure, in the beginning, it's easy to line up the cavalry in a neat formation. But once they started running, it was difficult to maintain the formation. If it could be maintained, then the power of their assault would increase many times over.